Welcome to Detangle, where we untangle the complexities of life, one conversation at a time. I'm your host, Dr. Kinjal Goel, a psychologist and a writer. Today, we shall delve into the world of luxury and fashion with none other than Mr. Tarun Tahiliani himself. Psychology sneaks into fashion design, and fashion lends itself to our moods. The co founder of Ensemble, Mumbai's first multi designer store, and of course his own fashion house, Mr. Tahiliani is a creative force to reckon with. Welcome to Detangle, Tarun, and thank you so much for joining me today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much, Dr. Kinjal. Nice to be here with you.
Well, let's start with the questions, Tarun. I can't wait to know so much that I have been wanting to ask you for a very long time. So, Tarun,
Sure.
when you design your clothes, when you design so much on a daily basis, how do cultural and psychological factors influence this aesthetic and design?
Well, from a wearer's point of view, psychology is a very important part. If we look at Maslow's hierarchical needs, clothing starts at a very basic level for, covering the body from the elements. Then it goes to the next stage, which is, some kind of modesty, societal norms. And finally, as we see today a lot on Instagram and with wealth, it's for people to project themselves. They're projecting wealth, they're projecting power, they're projecting sensuality. I mean, the way a woman might dress at night. There's multiple different things. So I can't, as a designer, take all of that into account. I design from a very different point of view, which is largely, to answer your question, rooted in our culture, but in our lifestyle. Fashion is designed for a life that people lead. So, three generations back, women might have sat at home and wore only saris, but they barely left their home except maybe to shop or for social engagement in the immediate community. Today,
True.
lives are very different. If someone's living in Malad and coming to South Bombay to work, because fashion's not only for the super rich, it's for everybody. I can see why being in a sari is not as convenient as wearing trousers or a shalwar kameez, because it's just easier. You have much more mobility and so on and so forth. But when I design, I always say that I grew up in South Bombay,
Mm-hmm.
and the greatest gift that fashion gave me is it made me appreciate and love India in a way that I never understood was possible. I grew up in Jesuit schools. We wanted to go to the clubs. We were sniffy about everything Indian. We grew up in this post-colonial haze of trying to be westernized and, only appreciating what the West has. And we all did piano and no one did classical music and we only spoke English, blah, blah, blah.
True.
And fashion took me to a world and made me love this country in a way that I would never have had I not got into this field. I've spent time in Kutch, I've spent time outside Lucknow block printing, and I've seen the beauty of our craft. So my mission is to take Indian workmanship and craftsmanship and make a contemporary clothing that works for today's man and woman, that fits in with our lifestyle, rather than just forgetting everything and wearing Western clothes. And at weddings, suddenly everyone going into Indian costume and trying to be Jodha, Akbar, or Maharajas. I mean, that's okay. It is that,
Well said.
yeah,
That
but
that is what is happening. Indian
y-
clothes have become costumes for us.
yeah, and they're uncomfortable, and people are struggling in 30 kilo things. Before, I mean, I've studied in the Ritu Kumar's beautiful book, all costumes that to me, and they're 200 kalis in a lenga, but they just sat. No one wore stilettos, nobody danced. They sat and were on display before a big wedding. It
Mm-hmm.
was a different lifestyle that was for projection. Today's lifestyle allows so much that this shouldn't be about projection, I think. But we've evolved and you are liberated and educated, and one should dress and understand that luxury is for oneself. So anyway, for me, I want to revive. So we do chicken curry, we do kashida kam, and everyone thinks of Indian fashion in terms of color and embroidery. But for me, the most powerful thing is the draped form. And I always say when I'm talking, if I landed down a parachute 200 years back, I would know by looking around me, just as I would know if I heard a language or tasted the food. I would know by the way people draped fabric, what part of the country I was in. It was that distinct a visual vocabulary. So in Kathiawar, they'll wear safas and dhotis the same way, but it still looks individualistic. And the Gujarati sari is different to, say, the Nauwar in Maharashtra, to the Kurgi saris, the Bengali. So I want to also keep this draped form. Even if people can't drape that way, I want to keep it in the consciousness because it's something that suits Indian body types and is beautiful. And, with our new ready to wear, I'm sure we will be able to offer it at an accessible price point and make it very relevant. When we started on some, the need post socialism was to revive Indian fantasticness in weaves and
Wow.
embroidery. And so it kind of went in that trajectory. And I think we've got where we need to go. Now we're using our technical knowledge of structured clothing because that didn't exist in India. You and me and somebody 1/10 my size could share one churidar because it was on a nada patti. It isn't
True.
so anymore.
True.
So that's really what my mission is. And so I work out of a very strong cultural context, a global context of what fashion is, and the needs of people. Because fashion isn't something pretty to be looked at, it's to be lived in. You live your life. Every new pattern we do, we have fit models who come in once every week or two, and we make them walk. Can you sit? Can you stand? Can you get out of a car? So that it's functional and it's comfortable. And that's the purpose of fashion. And particularly today, if you want sustainability, if clothes feel beautiful on your skin, you'll wear them again and again. And if it's just some uncomfortable projection, you'll wear it once and never touch it again. So many
There's
things.
so much there's so much that goes behind what you do, what we see are these beautiful clothes on your racks and on your mannequins, but we don't know the thought process, the whole feeling that you put into
I
it.
want to tell you, it's a very intense and demanding life, and you're always working and always in the studio. And of course, in India, because things get copied all the time, you have to keep innovating, which is fun. I enjoy that. I'm not complaining. But I'm saying it's a demanding life. It's not like you can work intensely like a movie star and then take off for 4 months till you start your next movie, or better still, model polyester clothes and make a fortune. But, it's a different thing. And it's very, you survive in it because you love it. And that's the way it is. It's intense. It's not what people think it is. It's not about glamour. It's not about any of that. That's a little tip of the iceberg, which is part of the marketing.
True. So tell me, I'm sure you see this a lot. I hear about it a lot from my own patients that sometimes all you need to do is get up, dress up, and show up. So you see a lot of your clients feel good, feel empowered, and feel beautiful when they are in your creations. How does that make you feel?
I think it's a wonderful thing. I had a wonderful, wonderful friend who was the studio muse called Minal Modi, Lalit Modi's late wife, who was
Hmm.
extremely beautiful and sophisticated and had the most exquisite taste I've ever seen, truly. Understated, and she had her own point of view and elegance, whether she was wearing Western or Indian clothes. You could see the same aesthetic. And she was very sick. And she rang me out of the blue in Bombay and said, "Listen, I need you to make me a sari and a beautiful blouse, and I want this sort of color. And I don't think I'm going to live very long." And I said, "Man, I'll stop it, stop it. This is too morbid." And she said, "No, I want to be carried out in the same way that I lived. I'm doing this for myself." And you're not going to believe it. I had to make her this beautiful couture blouse. I went to see her in London 5 days before. She made her daughter try it. And she was carried out exactly as she wanted, with the flowers and the jewelry of her choice. Simple, beautiful, serene, because she did it for herself.
Oh, that is so heartbreakingly beautiful.
It is, but this is the extreme of somebody who was such an aesthete that nothing was done for anybody else. It's just that she didn't know any other way. And even if little pills came, I mean, always staying at her house in Juhu, it's always such a beautiful experience. Even the way a breakfast tray would come up to the room, because she just didn't know any other way. And I think that's the power of fashion. You can put on something and transform how you feel, and it affects your self image. And of course, for luxury, it must feel good on your skin. It must be comfortable, naturally. Uh, but it has the power to transform. It's like, how they say the soul lives in many skins. Well, the body lives in many different avatars of costume or clothing, which can transform the way you feel and empower you if you allow it, or drag you down if you allow it. It's up to you.
Absolutely. I'm sure you understand color and the psychology of color much more than most of us do in our daily lives. Does that understanding of how color will impact a client's mind help you when you're creating specialty pieces, especially if it's for a bride or if it's for, let's say, a groom for his wedding? Does color psychology come in?
I think that no one can deny, and we Indians on our skin can carry, and it is part of our tradition to wear very bright and wonderful colors. We can carry shades of green and yellow and orange, but a lot of this, if I might say so,
True.
ha- in Rajasthan and Kutch, where also people lived in very arid surroundings, very brown villages, with mud houses and stuff, and there were dust storms, and so the bright color was also used as a beacon to be seen, to be, in that aridness, it gave things life. I think when you live in a city, in a beautiful, however beautiful an apartment, and with all the clutter and excess of money and industrial wealth that people live in today, I think the idea of color has to be changed and toned down, because in this milieu, it's very different to living in rural India and prancing around in some hot pink thing. You know what I mean? And
I
also,
know.
people always wore that sort of thing, and it was just one kind of costume. The women who wore saris. The men who wore dhotis were white, but they might have worn red safas, in Kutch, for instance, Kathiawar.
Hmm.
So I think that it's an individual thing. Of course, there are some people who just live and love in bright colors, and it's fine because it's true to what they respond to. Some have a different color idea of what suits their skin. Some feel that colors lift their skin, and some don't. But in today's world, when there's so much embroidery and cut and jewelry and makeup artists, I tend to prefer more subtle things. And I'm always being shouted by, oh my God, again the collection's 50% beige and dull gold, and but I think that in our urban milieu this works very well for me. If you're wearing a bright red or pink, it's beautiful if it's plain, but if it's red and pink with gold and embroidery, then I think for my eye I prefer it when it starts toning down a bit, just because there's so much going on that it's easier on the eye. But it's a personal thing, there's no right or wrong.
Well, you are a man behind my own heart because those are the colors that always appeal to me because they're so understated and we are so overstimulated, like you said. That
Exactly. We're living in the age of overstimulation, and how. And now with Instagram, we've taken stimulation to another level of projection, as well. I mean, I actually feel sorry for some of these Indian socialites who I look at, who day in, day out are out there wearing different clothes, projecting, trying to make their life sound so wonderful. And I just feel exhausted thinking, my God, kya effort, har roz 8 ghante you sit there dressing up to take a photograph to tell someone you're on this yacht or that. I mean, poor thing in a way. It's like the Empress's New Clothes, that lovely fable where
yes.
everyone's bang, bang, bang and saying wonderful, wonderful, and Bichara standing naked. I think this is a kind of emotional nakedness, if you want, that has such a need to be revered, or whatever you want to call it. God knows what it is. But anyway, so be it.
True. There's also this whole psychology of luxury, which I find very fascinating. Luxury means so many different things to different people. Somebody wants to look like they have arrived. Somebody wants to dress in a certain way to prove to themselves that they have arrived. And fashion is the first step of luxury. So, how do you deal with this demand of, just looking rich and looking
Well,
gorgeous?
for a long time, luxury was the purview of the rich, say till 30, 40 years back, before this explosive wealth happened, right?
True.
So normally, if you look at a Maharaja or Maharani, look at Gayatri Devi. Is there
Hmm.
anyone whose photographs are more understated, with her two strands of pearls or always one necklace, chiffon? Because she was to the manner born. The same Minal Modi used to say to me, I don't wear a logo. I don't need a logo. I put my hand in a bag, and my hand will tell me if it's luxury or not, because it's what you feel. But in today's world, where people are just trying to show they've arrived, it's the logo, because I don't think a lot of them understand why it's so luxurious. They want logos from head to toe. I mean, I see people in Emporio in Delhi, logo t shirt, logo pants, logo bag, you know. everything has a logo. Glasses have a big thing, Joby at Dior or something written. And it feels like it's exhausting, I mean, I used to shout at my children and say, you're wearing all these T-shirts, these soccer things. I mean, you're advertising Emirates, you're advertising. Are you being paid for this? Are you crazy? Like, what is
That's
this?
some way to look at it,
Yeah.
yes.
Anyway, so I suppose a lot of it is part of identification. And that's, again, a first stage in the evolution of money. And that's why, in fact, I was thinking, Louis Vuitton's bags are really beautifully made. I mean, they last. But I was just thinking, if they remove those logos, I wonder, and the pricing was half, sales should technically double. The sales would
Mhm.
be one tenth. Most people are carrying it for the logo, I think. So, you know, I think
Possibly.
this is a new world. There's a lot of money. These are all badges of identification. But truly, people who are truly secure and comfortable in their skin may wear it because you like the product, no problem, but are equally comfortable wearing things that have no mark of identification. I think a really good example I like to give is this designer called Brunello Cucinelli, who does cashmere sweaters. They're very expensive. And someone once gifted me one, and I love the feeling of it on my skin that I wear it 100 times and I look after it more carefully than anything else. And
Hmm.
that's true luxury. And if you want the world to be sustainable, or you want sustainable fashion, the only answer is to buy quality and use it 100 times. Not to be flippant and not to buy fast fashion that just looks good in a picture and throw it away. There are 90 billion pieces of clothing going into landfills every year, at least. We need to think about all of this.
True, and that actually brings me to my next question. Fashion is literally ever changing and never changing. And now, with this speed, I mean, people are throwing things away so fast. But do you think that the psychological relationship that people had with their clothing and style has now changed?
Like everything, I think it's hard to, just generalize.
Hmm.
I think Indian fashion has been a textile fashion traditionally. So you can take out your great grandmother's saris and wear it. But if you're French or English, I dare say you would not be able to wear your great grandmother's clothes, even if they fit you perfectly, right? They would
True.
look from a different period. Here you can change your blouse, you can wear it in the contemporary way. So I think that a lot of this consumerism has been fueled by economic growth and department stores saying that, okay, how do we sell next? So we make the new thing come into fashion. So next
Mm.
season, lime green is in fashion. So shoes, bags, everything will be connected. It's like, that's what's called the trend. But today, more and more people, today's world has so many people in the game that there are multiple trends. So, someone could choose to look like a traditional Sabyasachi bride, someone could look like Manish Malhotra, the thing, someone could look like beige sophistication in TT. I mean, everything goes, right? Just in that one category.
True.
But I think that this fast fashion, which is to affect and help people, you know, define themselves. And it's partly a manipulation and marketing. And it's also people's insecurity or desire to show that different. And Instagram's made it worse because I hear a lot of women never want to be seen in the same outfit twice. And none of this is good for luxury or sustainability or even one's own sense of self. What's more beautiful than your personality or your mind or your face? That you don't change your face every day, but chalo, aaj they're changing their face also with plastic surgeons
Hmm, I
and
know.
looking retarded half the time. So anyway, it's a phase. Life and the world always corrects itself. And anyway, I don't mean to sound pessimistic, but I don't think at the rate at which we are going, this David Attenborough says that this Halocene, the fifth Halocene, which is the current incarnation of the planet, is going to survive too much longer. I mean, every
Oh.
day there's some kind of hideous thing happening. New York City yesterday, you have to
Yeah.
see the videos. My God. Anyway,
So, when you talk about, people trying to fit in, people trying to stay relevant, it makes me think about all these body issues that now we've been trying to hide. Now people don't even talk about having any body dysmorphia, but they do. Everyone wants to look a little bit better. than the mirror tells them they do. So I'm sure you are the champions on the front lines when it comes to body image. How do you, as a brand, deal with that?
You know, again, I always say if you take a typical, very large Indian woman
Hmm.
and she was to go and Mr. Armani cut her pantsuit, I mean, she'd look okay, maybe. But if she knows how to drape herself in a sari, with her little nut and her bindi and from fresh flowers, that was the idea of beauty in India. And it still looks great, even if three rolls of fat are hanging out of her blouse. Somehow it just works because the draped form, and in our society till two generations back, it was cool to look bigger. No one had a problem with it. It's definitely healthier to be slim. It's healthier to be fit. You feel much better. I myself have, issues of my body because, I was very slim growing up and I'm always struggling and I'm always working out, but I'm also overeating and, tailored clothes look better on a certain form. It's part
Hmm.
of, it's the kind of the malaise of our times. Part of it is good for health. Part of it is unrealistic in terms of what is projected. I find so much advertising so dishonest because you can doctor images. And I remember Preeti Zinta talking about a shoot at Vogue where they put her on a stool, then they dropped this long kawali dress, and she suddenly looked 6 feet two and a totally different proportion. And I always told that editor, I said, why are you doing this to Indian women? It's not the Indian body. You're making beautiful Indian women feel complex about their bodies.
True.
It's not your right to do this. You have to celebrate who we are. But, it all goes back, Doc, to being colonized in such a big way that we're always looking west for our idea of beauty and our idea of this. That's why everyone's going blonde right now. I mean, the whole thing looks so ridiculous to my eye, but I don't know what to do and say. I think people who are comfortable in their skin always look much better and are sensuous,
Hmm.
about it. And that's just the way it is. I mean, I think Adele is one of the most fabulous looking creatures on the earth. I think
So true.
Rekha in her sari is beautiful. I think many women here are gorgeous. They're not thin or skinny or anorexic. It's fine.
Yeah, true. I think it's such a great time to be alive. There's diversity, there's inclusivity. Everyone's expanding their horizons of creativity. People are more accepting. But I also feel that there's a very strong paradox right now in society where there is offense being taken at everything, right? You can say anything, you can do
I mean,
anything,
this
you
is
can create
wokeism
anything.
at its extreme. Yes, it is a very nice time, but I think there's also so many conflicting. I actually feel sorry for children coming of age at this time because unless you have a very deep keel of your own consciousness and your uh, sense of self, I think looking outward to find your own identity is confusing the shit out of people. It's like, going to a table and seeing 1,000 dishes, you're dazed. You don't even know where to start, right? Yeah, it's only so much. And I think everything's becoming too much information, too much sensory overload, not enough downtime. Something we all suffer from. If I sit
True.
for half an hour and I'm not doing something, I jump up and I feel guilty. It's ridiculous, but it's true. And I think that's a modern malaise. So, yes, it is fantastic in terms of at this time you can express yourself, be yourself, but you have to have that conviction to do it. And I think a lot of people suffer from anxiety and
You're right.
depression and so many other things you would know better than me. Uh, you know, I've seen it amongst my children and their friends, and I'm unable to understand because they had things that we never had, but they'd never had the stillness and the forced downtime to germinate who they are. I think,
That's such a
even
beautiful visual. Like you're just left in the mud and you've got your darkness around, and that's
I
when you're
love
germinating.
that the line of that, Goldie Hawn's book, The Lotus Grows Out of the Mud. But you have
Mm.
to be in there, in that slash. And I don't know. I mean, just staying connected and, in this vacuous way. And the television's on. And when my children are watching something, I shout at them, they're watching three things at once. With three TVs and screen and this match and that match. And then they do video games, and I said, "Is this a video game? It's so realistic." I said, "When you actually see someone being killed, you're going to be immune because you're like doing, 24/7." So I don't know, I don't know if this is good or bad, but I found a lot more people content 40, 30, 40 years back than I'm seeing now, and it could be my perception. I find a lot
But
of the people who work in design because they spend time on their own, and I'm sure scientists or doctors, there are many professions that are good, but I'm seeing a lot of angst in the younger generation today.
tell me, Tarun, if there is a young artist who wants to be a fashion designer, a lot of people have this question: do they really need formal education to be a good designer, or should they be mentored by somebody whose process they like? What's a better route?
You know, like everything else, Chanel was never, she didn't go to design school. She grew up in an orphanage and she learned to sew, and she did many different things. And, she was living with this man called Boy Capel, who was a great love of her life. And she'd wear his tweeds and his knits. And she decided that this should come into women's wear. So she had a lifetime of experience that she slowly expanded and took into a visceral process and brought it out in her creativity. Today's world is a little different. And particularly if you want to do fashion with construction, then I think it's important to learn how to sew. And since we don't sew in India ourselves, go to design school. I couldn't do all the structured draping that I do if I didn't go to design school. In fact, I went much later at the age of 30 because I was frustrated explaining things to Indian master Gs who couldn't do it. So, McQueen worked at Savile Row before he went to Central Saint Martin's, which is why he could cut like a dream. He didn't even need a pattern. It was just in his hands.
Oh, wow.
So I went to design school when I was much later, but I can draw anything. But even with the drawing, people can't understand. So you have to be able to technically explain it and break it down. And I think that comes from your own experience. And they always say that after 10,000 hours, you really get good at something.
Absolutely.
And more than that, I think it's just a wonderful time to go to school. If you can afford it, you have time to think, you have time to drape, you have whatever it is that you love, and develop a skill. I don't see what's the harm in this. I think it's a gift to be able to do that. Sure, there'll be people who don't do it, but you know, then they become more textile-y, or you learn. We've learned embroidery. I don't embroider, but I know about every stitch because I've sat for hours over embroiderers who embroidered for me from 1987, and so I just
Wow.
learned along. Not that अपने हाथ से मैं नहीं कर सकता, but I know कि इसको यहाँ करो, try this thing, and everything is always evolving. Embroidery will change because today great embroiderers are doing things. I think that being technical allows you to jump ahead. It's like a stepping stone to developing and expressing your ideas.
Right. Let me get down to a very personal question now. This is the question I like to ask all my guests. We all have a first aid box in the house, right? Something with band aids and maybe Savlon, maybe some kind of other antiseptic or painkillers for a bad day when we've cut or bruised ourselves. What if
Mhm.
you were to have a mental first aid box in your house and you were to keep things in it which would make you happy the instant you saw them, like photographs or QR codes of your favorite songs? If you were to have a box like this, what would you put in it?
I have to have pencil and paper to sketch. It always centers me.
How lovely.
My piano box so I can practice.
Hmm.
Something to headphones so I can listen to music, and nice walking shoes so that I can walk and listen to music. It always makes me happy. I love doing all these things,
How
and I
lovely.
every day. Yeah.
How nice. Now tell me, Tarun, you know that I'm a psychologist. I am very far away from the field that you are so good at. But is there anything that you would like to ask me from my field?
Actually, I love social psychology. I studied at university.
Oh, really?
you know, this whole thing, the Zimbabwe experiment and people switching roles, and the whole famous experiment he did, right, with the prisoners and the prison guards, and
Mhm.
the guards, and then they switched it, and people's behavior changed in almost like a prophecy that this is what this kind of character is meant to play with. I always think that it's much nicer for humanity if we can just look at everybody equally and not be too fussed by the role we're here to play. I could just as well have been your driver, and you could have been my driver, and my driver could have been sitting where I do. So I always think that the best thing for humanity is to look at people with an even keel and not kind of be too fussed by all these positions, stations in life, right? Which, in fact, uh, you know, explain how we behave with different people. That to just be in a zone where you're self regardless. But I feel with all the knowledge, we're moving away from this. And I really feel that that's the biggest hope that humanity needs. And I think that, like you said earlier, with all this information, with all this thing, I'm just watching the planet and looking at the countries and looking at the dictators and think, my God, we're going back to the far end. We're becoming worse. What is the problem today? That's my question for you.
Wow, that's an existential crisis that you've put in front of me. But I think what you
That's
mentioned and
psychology.
what you
Yeah.
meant,
That's
you
just,
know,
I'm sure
what
it
you
does.
really, meant is that keeping your identity fluid is extremely important because identities are not permanent. So, this is what we also tell our clients that when you identify with only one thing, either your status, your role, your job, your hierarchy in your family, the minute that shifts, your balance completely gets
Mm,
thrown. And that's when people lose themselves and that's when they get into an existential crisis. So, if we can have, identities which are fluid and free flowing, we can be many things at once, we can be nothing for once. That's when we all learn to adapt and grow together.
that's very well said. Wow. You're right.
Well, I didn't expect this conversation to take all the little twists and turns that it did. Because when we think of fashion, honestly, it's only luxury, it's only temporary. Most people look at it as something that they desire, but they don't see how beautifully invested a designer is in the art, in the craft, in the learning, in the teaching.
Oh,
And
it's
it's
the
a fascinating world out there.
day. I've been up since 4 o'clock working on different things. I'm happiest doing it. That's the gift of fashion. Of course, businesses can do well and up and go down, and you might make money and all the rest of it. But there's nothing like sitting in your studio and working. Nothing.
How wonderful. Tarun, after this conversation, I really want to come to your store again, a store which I've visited so many times. But this time, when I look at your creations, I'm sure I look at them in a little different way. I'll see a little
But
bit more of you in your creations now.
16th of November, and you'll be witness to something that you'll understand even with greater depth. Because
Oh, before we close, can you give us a little detail about what is happening on the 16th of November?
well, I told you that we were working on a book called A Journey to India Modern because I love chicken curry, I love this and I love that, but I don't really want to see it in wedding clothes, which have become like costumey and, Jodha Akbar and all this jazz that people used to describe it. I wanted to see how we could take these and put them into modern avatars that could be worn in our day-to-day lives because luxury has to be worn all the time. It's not a costume for a big, this thing. And I also find it sad to see people just in Western clothes and then all this over heavy Indian for Ganpati and this and that. You know, I think a country with a culture heritage as rich as ours must find a new Indian way that's more pervasive. Like our food is still very Indian, even though it's more healthy, but because we speak English, we tended to become a little too westernized too fast. And some of our socialites only promote that. And, we're still a little, I think, colonized in that respect. I think our own magazines have failed us a lot of the time. So the book is called A Journey to India Modern. And, I went to the Kumbh Mela because I love draping and looked at sadhus and photographed them. And we came back and did the draped collection. And I went to Kutch and we did wonderful things with Bandhani. And then, of course, we did the miniature paintings and the pitchwise in the pandemic because we were giving people things to embroider as wall hangings. And that became a big collection of clothing. So it's always a visceral process that something starts and evolves. I worked with the Singh twins, it was inspired by Mrinalini Mukherjee. So we're doing this parade for the
Mm-hmm.
book to show, which the book is structured like that, inspiration from India and how it's been reinvented in a modern way. And that's why it's called A Journey to India Modern. So the sadhus will walk with the models wearing kumbh
Oh,
inspired,
wow.
yeah, and so forth. That's what we're doing. And I'm very excited. It's crazy. And we have village performers because I love a lot of Desi performers. And, you know, I always have
How
these
nice.
ideas and let's see what happens. Yeah,
It seems like a total treat for the senses.
absolutely. Should be.
Well, it's been a true pleasure talking to you, Tarun. I am so grateful that I could have you with me today on my podcast to discuss so many aspects of psychology and fashion. I've learned a lot, and I'm sure that all our listeners are more keen to understand what clothes they're wearing, why they feel a certain way, and why they wish to dress a certain way. Thank you for sharing your expertise. Thank you for letting us know that fashion is so much deeper and so much more than what we just see in stores.
And it touches so many lives, We did a show for B20 just 2 weeks before G20, and Piyush
Oh,
Goyal was the very smart minister for textiles.
hmm,
Came up to us and said he was almost embarrassed to say fashion, but when he saw the show and he saw the response, and I said, "Sir, when you see a lehenga coming down the ramp, it's been worked on in a village for 6 months. So it's actually really artisanal and it represents a heritage and craftsmanship at a very deep level." And he said, "I understood the soft power of fashion." So, three cheers to that, and look forward to seeing you on the 16th.
absolutely. And more power to you, more power to everybody who works with you.
Thank
And
you.
just thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure. Bye bye.